I sat frozen in that glass conference room watching my boss, Gerald, destroy 3 months of my work in front of 12 department heads. Every cruel joke, every interruption, every smirk felt like a knife twisting deeper. But I kept smiling. For 3 excruciating hours, I maintained that calm expression while he shredded my presentation slide by slide. When he finally paused, leaning back in his leather chair with that satisfied grin, I asked for just 2 minutes to respond. "Go ahead," he laughed, "if you can salvage this mess." That Tuesday morning started like any other, except my stomach churned with nervous energy. I arrived at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions at 6:30 in the morning, a full hour and a half before my scheduled presentation. The quarterly strategy meeting represented everything I had worked toward for the past 3 years at this company. My briefcase contained copies of the most comprehensive market analysis I had ever produced, complete with competitor research demographic studies and projected revenue models that could revolutionize our client acquisition approach. The conference room on the 15th floor overlooked downtown Seattle, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. I arranged my materials meticulously on the mahogany table, testing the projector twice to ensure perfect connectivity. My PowerPoint presentation contained 47 slides of carefully crafted data, each graph and chart representing weeks of late nights and weekend research. The promotion to Senior Marketing Director hung in the balance of this single presentation, and I refused to let any technical difficulties derail my opportunity. By 8:15, the senior executives began filtering into the room. Patricia Williams from Human Resources nodded politely as she claimed her usual seat near the window. David Chen, our Chief Financial Officer, reviewed quarterly reports while sipping his morning coffee. Sandra Martinez from Client Relations chatted quietly with Thomas Anderson, the Vice President of Operations. One by one, the department heads filled their designated spots around the massive conference table. At 8:25, 5 minutes before the scheduled start time, everyone had arrived except Gerald Thompson, my direct supervisor and the director of marketing. The murmur of casual conversation filled the space as executives discussed weekend plans and recent client developments. My palms grew damp as I glanced repeatedly at the door, wondering where Gerald could be. His tardiness struck me as particularly odd, since he typically arrived early to establish his authority over important meetings. Finally, at 8:40, Gerald burst through the conference room doors with theatrical flair. His wrinkled shirt suggested he had slept in his office again, and the faint smell of whiskey lingered around him like an invisible cloud. His bloodshot eyes scanned the room with predatory satisfaction before settling on me with unmistakable contempt. "Well, well," Gerald announced loudly, interrupting the ongoing conversations. "Looks like our little marketing prodigy is ready to dazzle us with her revolutionary insights." His tone dripped with sarcasm as he settled into his chair at the head of the table. "Please, Heather, enlighten us with your wisdom." I stood confidently, smoothing my navy blue blazer and approaching the front of the room. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to review our quarterly marketing strategy. Today's presentation will cover our comprehensive market analysis, competitor positioning, and proposed client acquisition methods that project a 30% increase in quarterly revenue." 30 seconds in and already making wild promises, Gerald interrupted, chuckling at his own commentary. "This should be entertaining." The first slide appeared on the projection screen, displaying our current client demographics, broken down by age, income level, and geographic distribution. I began explaining the research methodology behind our data collection, but Gerald interrupted again within moments. Hold on," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Did you actually verify these numbers, or did you just pull them from some online survey? Because frankly, this looks like the kind of amateur research a college intern might produce." My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I maintained my professional composure. These statistics come from our official client database cross-referenced with industry reports from Marketing Research Association and validated through direct client surveys conducted over the past 6 months. Gerald mused theatrically, stroking his chin. And how exactly did you conduct these surveys? Did you personally call every single client? Or did you delegate that responsibility to someone more qualified? The other executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Patricia Williams frowned at Gerald's unnecessarily aggressive questioning, while David Chen focused intently on his notepad, clearly trying to avoid eye contact. The room's energy had shifted from professional anticipation to awkward tension within the first 5 minutes of my presentation. I clicked to the next slide, displaying competitor analysis charts that compared our services with 3 major industry rivals. Our research indicates significant gaps in competitor offerings, particularly in digital marketing integration and customer retention strategies. Competitor analysis, Gerald repeated mockingly. Let me guess you spent an afternoon browsing their websites and called it research. Did you actually speak with any of their clients, or are you basing this entire analysis on publicly available marketing materials? I conducted comprehensive research, including industry publications, client feedback surveys, and strategic analysis of their promotional campaigns across multiple platforms, I replied, struggling to keep frustration from creeping into my voice. Gerald leaned forward with a predatory smile. Multiple platforms. How impressive. And tell me what exactly qualifies you to analyze strategic campaigns when your biggest success here has been managing our social media calendar. The deliberate humiliation was working exactly as he intended. I could feel my confidence wavering as his attacks became increasingly personal and inappropriate. My 3 years of stellar performance reviews, successful client campaigns, and consistent revenue growth meant nothing in this moment. Gerald had transformed my professional presentation into a public execution, and every department head in the room was witnessing my systematic destruction. 20 minutes into what should have been a 45-minute presentation, Gerald delivered his first major blow. You know what, everyone, he announced to the room. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I've already made my decision about the senior marketing director position. Brandon Walsh from our Phoenix office will be joining us next month to fill that role. So really, this whole presentation is just academic at this point. The words hit me like a physical punch. 3 months of preparation, countless overtime hours, and my entire career trajectory had just been dismissed as academic. My carefully researched presentation, which I had genuinely believed could transform our marketing approach, suddenly felt like an elaborate joke designed to humiliate me in front of the company's senior leadership. Gerald's satisfied smirk told me everything I needed to know. This meeting had never been about evaluating my work or considering my promotion. From the moment he walked through those doors, Gerald had planned to destroy me professionally, and he was thoroughly enjoying every second of his calculated cruelty. The revelation about Brandon Walsh receiving my promotion should have been devastating enough, but Gerald was just getting started. He stood up from his chair, circling the conference table like a shark sensing blood in the water. His next attack targeted not just my professional capabilities, but my personal presentation and character. You know what really concerns me about Heather's approach here? Gerald announced to the room, gesturing toward me as if I were an exhibit in a courtroom, is this tendency to oversell herself. Look at her right now, standing there in that overly formal business suit, trying so hard to project authority that she doesn't actually possess. My navy blazer, which I had carefully selected to convey professionalism and competence, suddenly felt like a costume. Gerald continued his commentary, while several executives stared at their phones, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this meeting had taken. And that voice, Gerald continued, cupping his ear in an exaggerated listening gesture. Does anyone else notice how she raises her pitch when she gets nervous? It's like listening to a teenager asking permission to borrow the family car. He demonstrated by mimicking my speaking tone in a high-pitched, whiny voice that bore no resemblance to how I actually sounded. Sandra Martinez from Client Relations looked genuinely appalled by Gerald's behavior, but remained silent. Thomas Anderson shifted in his seat and checked his watch repeatedly, clearly wanting to escape this increasingly uncomfortable situation. Only David Chen seemed to be taking notes, though whether he was documenting my presentation content or Gerald's inappropriate conduct remained unclear. Gerald returned to his chair and opened a manila folder that I had not noticed him bring into the meeting. Since we're all here together, I thought this might be a perfect opportunity to review some performance issues that have been brought to my attention over the past few months. My heart sank as I realized he was holding my personnel file. The contents of that folder were supposed to remain confidential between employee and supervisor. Yet, Gerald was preparing to air my private employment history in front of 12 senior executives. "Let's see," Gerald said, flipping through papers with theatrical deliberation. "Here's an interesting incident from March. Heather apparently scheduled a client presentation for the same time as our quarterly budget meeting. When I tried to explain the conflict, she became argumentative and accused me of deliberately undermining her work. That March incident had been a genuine scheduling error caused by conflicting calendar invitations. Gerald had resolved the situation by rescheduling my client meeting without consulting me, causing me to scramble to contact the client and explain the last-minute change. Far from being argumentative, I had simply requested that future scheduling conflicts be discussed rather than unilaterally resolved. And here's another gem from April. Gerald continued, clearly enjoying his captive audience. Heather submitted an expense report claiming reimbursement for a client lunch that included alcoholic beverages, which directly violates company policy. When I questioned the expense, she claimed she was unaware of the alcohol policy, despite it being clearly outlined in her employment handbook. The April expense report had been for a legitimate business lunch with Sarah Peterson from Cascade Industries, one of our most valuable clients. Sarah had ordered a single glass of wine with her meal, and I had included the entire lunch cost on my expense report without thinking to separate the alcohol charge. Gerald had made me reimburse the company $12.87 for Sarah's wine, despite the fact that the lunch meeting had resulted in a contract renewal worth $43,000. "Oh, and this is my personal favorite," Gerald said, producing a printed email from the folder. "Last month, Heather sent me a message questioning my decision to assign the Henderson account to another team member. The tone of this email was completely inappropriate and bordered on insubordination. The Henderson account email had been a professional inquiry about workload distribution. Henderson Industries had specifically requested to work with me based on our previous successful collaboration, but Gerald had reassigned the account to Brandon Walsh in Phoenix, without explanation. My email had politely requested clarification about the reassignment and offered to brief the new account manager on Henderson's preferences and history. Gerald stood again, this time, positioning himself directly behind my chair as I remained standing near the projection screen. His physical proximity felt threatening and inappropriate, forcing me to turn awkwardly to maintain eye contact with my audience while he loomed over me. "What we're seeing here," Gerald announced with the authority of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments, "is a pattern of unprofessional behavior, poor judgment, and inability to accept constructive feedback. These incidents demonstrate exactly why Heather is not ready for senior-level responsibility." The systematic character assassination was working perfectly. Gerald had transformed minor administrative issues and normal workplace communication into evidence of my fundamental incompetence. Each incident removed from its context and presented through his distorted lens painted a picture of an employee who was difficult, unprofessional, and unsuitable for advancement. But Gerald was not finished. He returned to his manila folder and produced his smartphone, holding it up for the room to see. In fact, I've been documenting some of these concerning behaviors to share with upper management. I think it's important that leadership has a complete picture of an employee's performance before making promotion decisions. My blood ran cold as I realized what Gerald was implying. He had been secretly recording our private conversations documenting my work performance without my knowledge or consent. The phone in his hand represented potential evidence of every mistake, every moment of frustration, and every private comment I had made over the past several months. I have here approximately 40 minutes of audio recordings from various meetings and interactions with Heather over the past quarter, Gerald announced proudly. These recordings clearly demonstrate the attitude and communication issues that make her unsuitable for leadership roles within this organization. The room fell completely silent. Patricia Williams from Human Resources looked genuinely alarmed by Gerald's admission of secret recordings. David Chen stopped taking notes and stared directly at Gerald with obvious concern. Even Sandra Martinez, who had been trying to avoid involvement in the uncomfortable situation, turned her full attention to Gerald's revelation. Gerald. Thomas Anderson finally spoke up. Are you saying you've been recording private conversations with employees without their knowledge? I've been documenting performance issues, Gerald replied defensively, apparently unaware that his recording admission had crossed a significant legal line. It's my responsibility as a supervisor to maintain accurate records of employee behavior and performance. The revelation about secret recordings should have been the climactic moment of Gerald's presentation, but instead it marked the beginning of his own downfall. He had just admitted to a room full of senior executives that he had been illegally recording private workplace conversations. The very evidence he thought would destroy my career had actually provided me with the ammunition I needed to destroy his. Gerald concluded his systematic destruction by announcing his final recommendation. Based on everything we've seen here today, and considering the documented performance issues in Heather's file, I'm recommending that she be transferred to our document management department in the basement level. I believe filing and data entry would be a much better match for her current skill level. The proposed transfer to basement filing was meant to be the ultimate humiliation, but instead, it became the moment of perfect clarity I needed. Gerald had overplayed his hand, revealed his illegal recording activities, and provided me with exactly the evidence I needed to end his career while saving my own. Gerald's announcement about transferring me to the basement filing department should have been the final blow, but instead it triggered something unexpected inside me. As I stood there listening to his recommendation that I be demoted to data entry clerk, a strange calm descended over my mind. The panic and humiliation I had been fighting for the past 2 hours suddenly transformed into crystalline focus. Document management would give Heather the opportunity to learn fundamental organizational skills. Gerald continued, apparently interpreting my silence as defeat. Sometimes we need to take a step backward in order to move forward in our careers. He was enjoying this moment far too much. Gerald had orchestrated this entire meeting as public entertainment, transforming my professional presentation into a 3-hour humiliation ritual designed to destroy my reputation in front of the company's senior leadership. But his excessive cruelty and obvious personal satisfaction revealed something important that everyone else in the room could see clearly. Now, before we wrap up this meeting, Gerald announced with theatrical flair, I want to give Heather one final opportunity to respond to everything we've discussed here today. After all, fairness is important in these situations. Patricia Williams from Human Resources shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The expression on her face suggested she was witnessing something deeply inappropriate, but she remained silent. David Chen continued taking detailed notes, his pen moving rapidly across the page as he documented every word of Gerald's inappropriate commentary. Thomas Anderson checked his watch again, clearly eager to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Gerald, I said quietly, my voice steady and calm despite the chaos swirling in my mind. I would appreciate the opportunity to respond to your concerns. Would 2 minutes be sufficient time for me to address the issues you've raised? The room fell silent as every executive turned their attention to this unexpected development. Gerald leaned back in his chair with obvious amusement, clearly anticipating either an emotional breakdown or an angry outburst that would further confirm his assessment of my unprofessional behavior. 2 minutes. Gerald laughed, looking around the room as if sharing a private joke with his audience. Sure, Heather. Take all the time you need. Let's see if you can salvage this mess you've created. His confident agreement to my request revealed everything I needed to know about his expectations. Gerald anticipated that my 2-minute response would either be a tearful apology or an emotional explosion that would provide the perfect conclusion to his carefully orchestrated character assassination. He had no idea that his systematic destruction of my reputation had actually given me the clarity and documentation I needed to end his career. As I stood there preparing my response, my mind raced through everything that had transpired over the past 3 hours. Gerald's behavior had crossed numerous professional and legal boundaries. His public humiliation tactics, his disclosure of confidential personnel information, his admission of secret recordings, and his obvious personal vendetta, disguised as performance evaluation, provided me with a comprehensive case for workplace harassment and retaliation. But there was something else. Something that had been building in the background of my consciousness throughout this entire ordeal. 6 months ago, Gerald had approached me after a company holiday party with what he described as a business proposition. We had been standing near the hotel bar when he suggested that my career advancement might benefit from closer collaboration with senior management. When I politely declined his suggestion and mentioned my policy of keeping work and personal relationships separate, his demeanor had shifted noticeably. The pattern of retaliation had begun immediately after that conversation. Client meetings that had been scheduled were mysteriously canceled without my knowledge. Reports that I submitted were returned with excessive revision requests for minor formatting issues. Projects that should have been assigned to me were given to other team members without explanation. Gerald had been systematically undermining my work performance for months, setting the stage for today's public execution. Whenever you're ready, Heather, Gerald said impatiently. We don't have all day for this. I looked around the conference room, making eye contact with each executive in turn. Patricia Williams from Human Resources, David Chen from Finance, Sandra Martinez from Client Relations, Thomas Anderson from Operations. These people had witnessed Gerald's inappropriate behavior firsthand. They had seen his unprofessional conduct, his disclosure of confidential information, and his admission of illegal recording activities. The security camera mounted in the corner of the conference room had been recording everything that transpired during this meeting. Gerald's own smartphone, which he had proudly displayed as evidence of my poor performance, actually contained recordings that documented his illegal surveillance activities. The very tools he thought would destroy my career had become the instruments of his own professional downfall. My father had worked in corporate America for 35 years before retiring, and he had shared countless stories about workplace politics and professional survival. His most important advice had been simple but profound documentation trumps emotion every time. When facing workplace harassment or retaliation, the person with the best records and the most compelling evidence would ultimately prevail. I'm ready now, I announced to the room, my voice clear and confident. Gerald settled back in his chair with obvious satisfaction, clearly expecting my response to provide the perfect conclusion to his elaborate performance. The other executives leaned forward slightly, their expressions suggesting a mixture of curiosity and concern about what might come next. But Gerald had made a critical error in his calculations. His excessive cruelty and obvious personal satisfaction had revealed the true nature of his motivations to everyone in the room. This was not a professional performance evaluation based on legitimate business concerns. This was personal retaliation, disguised as management oversight, and his behavior had crossed legal boundaries that would have serious consequences for both him and the company. The 2 minutes I had requested would be more than sufficient to destroy Gerald's career and expose the systematic harassment campaign he had been conducting. His own evidence, his own admissions, and his own behavior in front of 12 witnesses had provided me with everything I needed to turn his elaborate trap into his own professional grave. "Thank you all for your patience," I began, my voice carrying a confidence that seemed to surprise even me. "I'd like to address Gerald's concerns about my performance and provide some additional context that might be helpful for this discussion." The moment I began speaking, something fundamental shifted in the conference room atmosphere. My voice carried a calm authority that seemed to surprise everyone present, including myself. Gerald's satisfied smirk remained frozen on his face, but I noticed a slight flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as he registered the unexpected confidence in my tone. "Over the past 3 hours, Gerald has raised several concerns about my professional performance and personal conduct." I continued maintaining steady eye contact with each executive around the table. "I believe it's important to address these concerns with complete transparency and provide the full context that has been omitted from today's discussion." Patricia Williams from Human Resources leaned forward in her chair, her expression suggesting heightened attention to the legal implications of this entire situation. David Chen continued taking detailed notes, his pen moving rapidly as he documented my response with the same meticulous care he had applied to Gerald's accusations. "First, I want to acknowledge that Gerald has been my direct supervisor for the past 3 years, and his evaluation of my performance carries significant weight in determining my career advancement within this organization," I said, deliberately establishing the power dynamic and creating a foundation for what would follow. Gerald's confidence began to waver as he realized that my response was not following the script he had anticipated. Instead of emotional breakdown or angry defensiveness, I was presenting a calm, methodical analysis that suggested careful preparation and strategic thinking. However, I believe that context is essential for understanding the incidents that Gerald has described, and I'd like to share some additional information that might help clarify the situation. I continued reaching into my briefcase to retrieve a manila folder that I had not previously referenced during the meeting. The folder contained 6 months of carefully documented evidence that I had been collecting since Gerald's first retaliatory actions following my rejection of his inappropriate advances. Email correspondence, witness statements, performance evaluations, client feedback, and detailed records of every incident that Gerald had distorted in his character assassination. The March scheduling conflict that Gerald mentioned was indeed a legitimate error, I explained, opening my folder to reveal printed email exchanges. However, the resolution of that conflict involved Gerald unilaterally canceling my client meeting without consultation, despite company policy requiring collaborative scheduling decisions. I have here the email correspondence that documents the actual sequence of events. Gerald's face began to lose color as he realized that I had documentation contradicting his version of the March incident. His illegal recordings might contain evidence of my frustration and complaints, but my folder contained official company emails that revealed his policy violations and unprofessional conduct. The April expense report issue involved a single alcoholic beverage purchased by our client during a business lunch that resulted in a $43,000 contract renewal. I continued producing the relevant documentation. While I accept responsibility for the oversight regarding alcohol reimbursement, the successful outcome of that client meeting generated revenue that far exceeded the company's investment in the lunch. Thomas Anderson from operations nodded slightly as he recognized the Henderson Industries contract that had been one of our most significant client successes in recent months. The $12 wine charge that Gerald had made such an issue about suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the substantial revenue generated by that business relationship. Regarding the Henderson account reassignment that prompted my email inquiry, I said, turning to the next section of my documentation, Henderson Industries had specifically requested continued collaboration with me based on our previous successful projects. My email to Gerald was a professional request for clarification about the reassignment and an offer to brief the new account manager on Henderson's preferences and history. Sandra Martinez from Client Relations was familiar with the Henderson account and understood the value of maintaining consistent client relationships. Her expression suggested recognition that reassigning the account without client consultation might have been a questionable business decision. But the most important documentation in my folder had nothing to do with Gerald's distorted presentation of minor workplace incidents. 6 months ago, I had begun documenting a pattern of retaliation that started immediately after I declined Gerald's inappropriate advances at the company holiday party. There's one additional context element that I believe is relevant to this discussion. I said, my voice remaining steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. 6 months ago, Gerald approached me with what he described as an opportunity for career advancement that would involve closer personal collaboration outside of normal business hours. The room fell completely silent. Patricia Williams from Human Resources sat up straighter in her chair, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she recognized the legal implications of what I was describing. David Chen's pen stopped moving across his notepad as he focused entirely on my words. When I politely declined this opportunity and explained my preference for maintaining professional boundaries between work and personal relationships, I continued. Gerald's demeanor changed noticeably, and I began to observe a pattern of behavior that suggested retaliation for my decision. Gerald's face had turned completely pale, and his confident smirk had disappeared entirely. He opened his mouth as if to interrupt, but no words emerged. The systematic destruction he had orchestrated against me was about to become the foundation for his own professional downfall. I have documented evidence of this retaliatory behavior, including canceled meetings, reassigned projects, excessive revision requests for minor formatting issues, and deliberate exclusion from client interactions that were previously part of my regular responsibilities, I explained, showing the organized documentation in my folder. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. 3 weeks ago, I had received an anonymous email at my personal address from someone identifying themselves as a current Pinnacle marketing employee. The message contained a confidential whistleblower hotline number and information suggesting that Gerald's pattern of harassment extended beyond just my situation. I've also been in contact with 3 other female employees who have experienced similar patterns of retaliation following their rejection of Gerald's inappropriate advances. I announced, watching as the full magnitude of the situation began to dawn on everyone present. The anonymous email had led to confidential conversations with Jennifer Walsh from the graphic design department, Amanda Rodriguez from account management, and Sarah Thompson from client services. Each woman had experienced identical patterns of harassment and retaliation, but none had felt secure enough to file formal complaints due to fear of career consequences. These employees have agreed to provide statements to the appropriate authorities documenting their experiences, and we have collectively filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission alleging systematic workplace harassment and retaliation. I continued producing copies of the official EEOC filing from my folder. Gerald's illegal recordings, which he had proudly displayed as evidence of my poor performance, had actually captured his own retaliatory behavior and inappropriate comments about female employees. The smartphone he had been so eager to show off contained documentation of his own legal violations. Finally, I concluded, I want to address Gerald's admission that he has been secretly recording private workplace conversations without employee knowledge or consent. This practice violates both company policy and state laws regarding workplace surveillance and employee privacy rights. The room remained in absolute silence as the full implications of my 2-minute response became clear to everyone present. Gerald's elaborate character assassination had backfired completely, exposing his own misconduct, while providing me with the perfect platform to present documented evidence of his illegal behavior. His confident expectation that I would either break down emotionally or respond with unprofessional anger had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of both my character and my preparation. The systematic harassment campaign he had been conducting for 6 months had actually motivated me to build an airtight legal case that would end his career while protecting other women from experiencing similar treatment. The 2 minutes I had requested were almost finished, but I had accomplished everything I needed to achieve. Gerald's trap had become his own destruction, and the witnesses he had assembled to observe my humiliation were now documenting his own professional downfall. "Thank you for allowing me these 2 minutes to respond," I said, maintaining the same calm professional tone that had characterized my entire presentation. "I believe it's important that everyone in this room understands the complete context of the situation we're discussing here today." Gerald sat motionless in his chair, his face completely drained of color, as the full magnitude of his predicament began to register. The secret recordings he had proudly displayed as evidence of my incompetence were about to become exhibits in a federal harassment investigation. His systematic character assassination had provided me with the perfect opportunity to expose 6 months of documented retaliation in front of 12 senior executives. The incidents that Gerald has described represent his interpretation of normal workplace interactions that occurred during a period when he was systematically undermining my professional responsibilities. I continued referring to the organized documentation in my manila folder. Each of these situations has been taken out of context and presented in a way that distorts the actual circumstances and my professional conduct. Patricia Williams from Human Resources was furiously taking notes, clearly recognizing that she was witnessing potential evidence in what could become a significant legal liability for the company. Her expression suggested that she was already calculating the implications of Gerald's admitted recording activities and the harassment allegations I had just presented. For example, the March scheduling conflict occurred because Gerald deliberately scheduled the quarterly budget meeting at the same time as my previously confirmed client presentation, then resolved the conflict by canceling my client meeting without consultation. I explained producing the relevant email correspondence. My concern was not with scheduling conflicts themselves, but with the unilateral decision-making that violated our established collaborative protocols. David Chen from Finance nodded slightly as he reviewed his own records of the March budget meeting. The scheduling conflict had indeed been unusual, and Gerald's handling of the situation had seemed unnecessarily disruptive to established client relationships. The April expense report issue involved a legitimate business lunch with Sarah Peterson from Cascade Industries that resulted in a contract renewal worth $43,000, I continued. While I accept responsibility for including the client's alcoholic beverage in my reimbursement request, the successful outcome of that meeting generated substantial revenue for our organization. Thomas Anderson from Operations was familiar with the Cascade Industries account and understood the value of maintaining positive client relationships. The $12 wine charge that Gerald had transformed into evidence of my poor judgment suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the substantial business success that lunch meeting had generated. Most importantly, I said, turning to address the entire room directly, I want to ensure that everyone understands the context in which these minor administrative issues have been magnified into evidence of fundamental incompetence. I opened my folder to reveal a chronological timeline of Gerald's retaliatory behavior, complete with dates, witnesses, and documented evidence of his systematic campaign to undermine my professional performance. 6 months ago at our annual holiday party, Gerald approached me with what he described as an opportunity for career advancement that would require closer personal collaboration outside of normal business parameters. I explained, watching as several executives exchanged meaningful glances. When I politely declined this opportunity and expressed my preference for maintaining professional boundaries, Gerald's behavior toward me changed dramatically and immediately. The room remained completely silent, except for the sound of Patricia Williams' pen moving rapidly across her notepad. Everyone present understood the legal implications of what I was describing, and Gerald's earlier admission of secret recordings had already established his disregard for appropriate workplace conduct. Beginning the week following our holiday party conversation, Gerald began implementing what I can only describe as a systematic campaign of professional retaliation. I continued displaying documentation that showed the pattern of harassment with mathematical precision. Client meetings that had been scheduled were canceled without my knowledge. Reports that I submitted were returned with excessive revision requests for minor formatting issues. Projects that should have been assigned to me based on my expertise and client relationships were given to other team members without explanation. Sandra Martinez from Client Relations was nodding as she recognized several of the client interactions I was describing. She had witnessed some of Gerald's unusual interference with my established client relationships and had questioned the business logic of his decisions at the time. This pattern of retaliation has been documented not only in my own experience, but also in the experiences of 3 other female employees who rejected Gerald's similar approaches. I announced producing copies of witness statements that had been provided confidentially. Jennifer Walsh from Graphic Design, Amanda Rodriguez from Account Management, and Sarah Thompson from Client Services have all experienced identical patterns of harassment and professional retaliation following their rejection of Gerald's inappropriate advances. The revelation about multiple victims transformed this situation from an individual performance dispute into a company-wide crisis with serious legal implications. Patricia Williams looked genuinely alarmed as she realized that Pinnacle Marketing was potentially facing a systematic harassment lawsuit involving multiple employees and years of documented misconduct. These 4 employees, including myself, have collectively filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, alleging workplace harassment, retaliation, and systematic discrimination. I continued producing official copies of the EEOC filing. The investigation is currently active, and today's meeting has provided additional documentation that will be included in our formal complaint. Gerald finally found his voice attempting to interrupt my presentation with stammered denials. This is completely inappropriate. These are serious allegations that should be handled through proper channels, not aired in a public meeting. Gerald, I replied calmly, you've spent the past 3 hours airing confidential personnel information and private performance discussions in front of 12 senior executives. You've admitted to secretly recording private workplace conversations without employee knowledge or consent. You've used this meeting as a platform for public humiliation and character assassination. I believe my 2-minute response using documented facts and official legal filings is entirely appropriate, given the forum you've chosen for this discussion. Thomas Anderson from Operations spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Gerald, is it true that you've been recording private conversations with employees without their knowledge? I was documenting performance issues, Gerald replied defensively, apparently still unaware that his recording activities had violated both company policy and state law. It's my responsibility to maintain accurate records of employee behavior. Recording private conversations without consent violates both our company privacy policies and Washington state surveillance laws. I interjected, producing documentation of the relevant legal statutes. Those recordings cannot legally be used for any employment-related decisions, and their existence actually constitutes additional evidence of harassment and retaliation. The room erupted in quiet murmurs as executives began to grasp the full scope of Gerald's legal violations. His smartphone, which he had proudly displayed as evidence of my poor performance, actually contained illegal recordings that would likely result in criminal charges, as well as civil liability for the company. Furthermore, I continued, I have here documentation showing that Gerald has been falsifying performance reviews, misrepresenting client feedback, and deliberately withholding information that would have allowed me to successfully complete assigned projects. I produced emails showing how Gerald had failed to forward critical client communications, had altered project specifications without notification, and had provided inaccurate information about deadlines and requirements that were designed to ensure project failures. The pattern of sabotage has been so systematic and well documented that it will be impossible to argue that today's performance evaluation represents anything other than the culmination of a 6-month retaliation campaign designed to justify my termination or demotion. Patricia Williams from Human Resources was now visibly distressed as she realized the magnitude of the company's potential legal exposure. Gerald's behavior had created liability under multiple federal and state employment laws, and his actions during today's meeting had been witnessed by the entire senior leadership team. Finally, I concluded, I want to address the promotion decision that Gerald announced earlier in this meeting. Brandon Walsh from our Phoenix office is Gerald's personal friend and frequent golf partner. The decision to award him the senior marketing director position was made before my presentation was ever scheduled, and this entire meeting was designed as a pretext to justify that predetermined decision while publicly humiliating me as retaliation for rejecting Gerald's inappropriate advances. The 2 minutes had expired, but I had accomplished everything I needed to achieve. Gerald's elaborate trap had been turned against him with devastating effectiveness. His own evidence, his own admissions, and his own behavior in front of 12 witnesses had provided me with everything necessary to destroy his career while protecting myself and other women from future harassment. The silence in the conference room was deafening as everyone present contemplated the implications of what they had just witnessed. Gerald's confident expectation of my emotional breakdown had been replaced by the reality of his own professional annihilation. The silence that followed my presentation lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Gerald sat frozen in his chair, apparently still processing the magnitude of his miscalculation. The systematic character assassination he had orchestrated had backfired so completely that he seemed unable to comprehend what had just occurred. Patricia Williams from Human Resources was the first person to break the silence. Gerald, I need to see you in my office immediately following this meeting. Do not leave the building, do not make any phone calls, and do not discuss this situation with anyone until we've had an opportunity to review these allegations. Her tone carried the unmistakable authority of someone who recognized a company-threatening crisis when she saw one. Gerald's illegal recordings, his admitted harassment of multiple employees, and his retaliation campaign represented potential legal liability that could cost Pinnacle Marketing millions of dollars in settlements and regulatory penalties. David Chen from Finance closed his notepad and addressed the room with unusual gravity. I think we need to suspend this meeting immediately and convene an emergency session with our legal counsel. The issues that have been raised here today require immediate attention from qualified employment attorneys. Thomas Anderson from Operations was already reaching for his phone to contact upper management. I'm calling Richard Morrison right now. The CEO needs to know about this situation before we proceed any further. Richard Morrison, Pinnacle Marketing's chief executive officer, was currently attending a conference in New York, but the severity of this crisis demanded his immediate involvement. Gerald's behavior had exposed the company to federal investigations, wrongful termination lawsuits, and potential criminal charges related to illegal surveillance activities. Sandra Martinez from Client Relations looked directly at Gerald with obvious disgust. Gerald, I witnessed several of the client interactions that Heather described. Your interference with her established client relationships made no business sense at the time, and now I understand why you were deliberately sabotaging her work. The room's atmosphere had shifted completely. Gerald, who had entered the meeting as the authority figure orchestrating my professional destruction, was now being treated as a liability that needed to be contained and managed. His confident smirk had been replaced by the pale complexion of someone realizing that their career was ending in real time. "There's something else everyone should know," I said, producing the final document from my manila folder. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from the company's external legal counsel requesting copies of all personnel files and communication records related to Gerald's supervision of female employees. Patricia Williams looked genuinely shocked by this revelation. "I wasn't aware of any external legal inquiry. Gerald, did you receive this request as well?" "I may have gotten something like that," Gerald mumbled, clearly realizing that his failure to respond to legal inquiries would add obstruction of justice to his growing list of legal violations. The letter specifically mentioned concerns about systematic harassment and retaliation within the marketing department. I continued handing copies of the legal correspondence to Patricia Williams. "It appears that other employees or their attorneys have already initiated legal action against the company." This revelation suggested that Gerald's harassment extended beyond the 4 women I had mentioned, and that Pinnacle Marketing was potentially facing multiple lawsuits from employees who had been systematically targeted and retaliated against. Thomas Anderson's phone conversation with CEO Richard Morrison lasted only 3 minutes, but the urgency in his voice suggested that significant decisions were being made rapidly. When he concluded the call, his expression was grim. "Richard is catching the next flight back from New York," Thomas announced to the room. "He's instructed me to implement immediate containment measures. Gerald, you are suspended from all duties, effective immediately pending a complete investigation by external legal counsel." Gerald finally seemed to understand the severity of his situation. "This is ridiculous. I've been a loyal employee of this company for 8 years. You can't just suspend me based on unsubstantiated allegations from a disgruntled employee who's upset about not getting promoted." "Gerald," Patricia Williams replied sharply, "you admitted in front of 12 witnesses that you've been illegally recording private employee conversations. You disclosed confidential personnel information in a public meeting. You described a systematic campaign to document employee behavior for the purpose of building termination cases. These aren't allegations, they're admissions that you made yourself." David Chen was reviewing financial records on his laptop, apparently calculating the potential cost of Gerald's misconduct. "Based on the EEOC filing that Heather mentioned, we're looking at potential damages that could exceed $2 million. That's not including regulatory penalties, legal fees, or the cost of implementing new harassment prevention systems." The financial implications were staggering, but the reputational damage could be even more severe. Pinnacle Marketing's clients included several major corporations that had strict vendor requirements regarding workplace conduct and legal compliance. News of a systematic harassment scandal could result in contract cancellations that would devastate the company's revenue. "There's another issue we need to address immediately," I said, producing documentation I had been saving for this moment. "Gerald's expense account irregularities that I discovered while researching his pattern of misconduct." I handed Patricia Williams a folder containing copies of expense reports that showed Gerald had been charging personal purchases to the company credit card, claiming reimbursement for fictitious client entertainment events, and billing the company for personal travel expenses by describing them as business meetings. These expense account violations represent potential embezzlement charges in addition to the harassment and surveillance issues, I explained. The total amount of inappropriate charges over the past 18 months exceeds $15,000. Patricia Williams reviewed the expense documentation with growing alarm. Gerald's financial misconduct added criminal implications to what was already a devastating legal situation. The company would be required to report these findings to law enforcement agencies, as well as employment regulators. Security personnel arrived at the conference room within minutes of Thomas Anderson's second phone call. 2 uniformed guards positioned themselves near the door, while the head of security, Michael Rodriguez, approached Gerald directly. "Mr. Thompson, I need to escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings under supervision," Michael announced. "Your building access will be terminated immediately, and all company property must be returned before you leave the premises." Gerald's humiliation was now complete. The man who had orchestrated my public destruction was being escorted from the building by security guards while facing potential criminal charges and certain career termination. His illegal recordings, which he had intended to use as evidence of my incompetence, had become evidence of his own criminal behavior. But the most shocking development was yet to come. As Gerald stood to leave with security, Thomas Anderson received another phone call that would transform this situation from crisis management to complete organizational restructuring. "That was Richard Morrison again," Thomas announced after ending the call. "Based on the severity of this situation and the potential legal liability, he's implementing immediate changes to the management structure. Heather, you're being appointed as interim director of marketing effective immediately while we conduct a comprehensive review of departmental operations." The promotion I had been denied through Gerald's systematic sabotage was now being offered as part of the company's effort to demonstrate good faith in addressing the harassment crisis. My documentation and legal preparation had not only destroyed Gerald's career, but had also positioned me as the logical choice to lead the department's recovery and rebuilding process. Gerald's face contorted with rage as he realized that his elaborate revenge scheme had resulted in my immediate promotion to his former position. "This is insane. You're going to put her in charge of the department. She's the one who caused all these problems." "Gerald," Patricia Williams replied coldly, "Heather is the one who exposed problems that you created through years of misconduct. Her documentation and legal preparation have potentially saved this company from even more severe legal consequences. Now please leave with security before you make this situation any worse than it already is." As Gerald was escorted from the conference room, I realized that his systematic harassment campaign had ultimately achieved the opposite of its intended result. His efforts to destroy my career had provided me with the evidence and legal foundation necessary to end his career while advancing my own. The 2-minute response he had granted me with such confidence had become the instrument of his complete professional annihilation. The week following Gerald's suspension passed in a blur of legal meetings, investigative interviews, and organizational restructuring. Richard Morrison, our CEO, returned from New York within 24 hours and immediately implemented what he described as the most comprehensive workplace conduct review in company history. External employment attorneys, federal investigators, and internal audit specialists descended on Pinnacle Marketing like a coordinated task force responding to a corporate emergency. Gerald's termination was finalized on Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours after the company's legal team completed their review of the evidence I had provided. The illegal recordings on his smartphone contained not only documentation of his harassment campaign against me, but also evidence of similar misconduct, targeting 6 additional female employees over the past 3 years. His expense account irregularities, which totaled $22,000 in fraudulent charges, resulted in immediate referral to law enforcement for criminal prosecution. The 3 women I had mentioned in my presentation, Jennifer Walsh, Amanda Rodriguez, and Sarah Thompson, were each offered financial settlements and immediate promotions to positions that reflected their actual qualifications and contributions. Jennifer became the new senior graphic designer. Amanda was promoted to account management supervisor, and Sarah received the client services director position she had been denied repeatedly under Gerald's supervision. But the most satisfying vindication came from the client feedback that emerged during the investigation. Henderson Industries, Cascade Industries, and 4 other major accounts specifically requested that I be designated as their primary contact, citing the professional expertise and client service excellence that Gerald had been systematically undermining. The revenue generated by these client relationships over the past 6 months exceeded $1.2 million, directly contradicting Gerald's claims about my professional incompetence. My promotion to marketing director was made permanent within 2 weeks, accompanied by a salary increase that reflected both my new responsibilities and the company's recognition of the legal and financial consequences they had narrowly avoided through my documentation and preparation. The basement filing position that Gerald had recommended for me became a bitter irony that everyone in the company understood perfectly. The systematic harassment prevention program that Pinnacle Marketing implemented as part of the legal settlement became a model that other companies in our industry began adopting voluntarily. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory training programs, and independent oversight mechanisms transformed our workplace culture in ways that benefited everyone, not just the women who had been targeted by Gerald's misconduct. Richard Morrison addressed the entire company in an all-hands meeting 3 weeks after Gerald's termination. The events of recent weeks have forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our workplace culture and management practices, he announced. We failed to protect employees who were being systematically harassed and retaliated against, and we nearly lost valuable team members due to one individual's abuse of authority. He continued, but we've also learned that our employees are willing to stand up for what's right. Document inappropriate behavior and use proper legal channels to address serious misconduct. Heather's courage in exposing this situation has not only protected her colleagues, but has also made our company stronger and more accountable. The applause that followed his remarks felt different from typical corporate recognition. This was acknowledgement of a fundamental shift in how our organization approached employee protection and professional accountability. Gerald's reign of harassment had ended not through corporate intervention, but through the documented evidence and legal preparation of the women he had tried to destroy. Just 6 months later, I received a letter from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission informing me that our case had been selected as a model example of effective harassment documentation and reporting. The systematic evidence collection and legal preparation that had saved my career was now being used to train other employees and legal advocates facing similar workplace situations. Gerald's attempts to find new employment in our industry were unsuccessful, largely due to the professional references he received from Pinnacle Marketing and the criminal charges related to his illegal surveillance activities. The career destruction he had planned for me became his own professional obituary, written by his own misconduct and documented by his own illegal recordings. The promotion opportunity that had been stolen through Gerald's interference with Brandon Walsh became the foundation for the most successful period in our department's history. The marketing strategies that Gerald had systematically sabotaged generated record profits and industry recognition that elevated Pinnacle Marketing's reputation throughout the Seattle business community. But beyond the professional vindication and career advancement, the most meaningful outcome was the transformation in workplace culture that emerged from this crisis. The women who had suffered in silence under Gerald's harassment found their voices and their power. The men who had witnessed inappropriate behavior but remained silent learned to recognize and interrupt misconduct. The company leadership that had failed to detect systematic harassment implemented systems that would prevent similar failures in the future. I learned that bullies count on your silence and isolation. The moment you shine light on their behavior and refuse to be intimidated, their power crumbles. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting angry, it's getting even through the proper channels with evidence and with the law on your side. My 2 minutes didn't just save my career, it saved other women from experiencing what I went through. The glass conference room where Gerald had orchestrated my public humiliation became the site of monthly team meetings where innovative ideas were celebrated and collaborative problem-solving flourished. The systematic documentation that had saved my career became a template that other employees used to protect themselves from workplace misconduct. The 2-minute response that Gerald had granted with such confidence became legend among our colleagues as proof that preparation and courage could overcome even the most calculated cruelty. Gerald's carefully planned trap had become his own destruction, but more importantly, it had become the foundation for positive change that protected other women from experiencing similar harassment. The workplace culture that had enabled his misconduct was transformed into an environment where professional excellence was recognized and inappropriate behavior was swiftly addressed. Standing in that same conference room 6 months later, presenting our department's record-breaking quarterly results to the same executives who had witnessed my humiliation, I felt profound gratitude for the strength I had discovered during those 2 crucial minutes. Gerald's systematic harassment had inadvertently provided me with the documentation and legal foundation necessary to not only save my own career, but to create lasting change that would protect future generations of employees. The ending was clear, fully resolved, and deeply satisfying. Justice had been served through proper legal channels. Careers had been rebuilt on foundations of merit and excellence, and workplace culture had been transformed to prevent similar misconduct. Gerald's elaborate revenge scheme had achieved the opposite of its intended result, creating the very success and recognition he had tried so desperately to deny me. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone tried to sabotage your success, only to have their actions backfire and actually help you achieve your goals? What strategies have you used to document and address workplace harassment or unprofessional behavior? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below and how you've turned challenging situations into opportunities for positive change. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others discover it. Subscribe for more workplace survival stories and professional development content, and share your own experiences or advice in the comments. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the most powerful response to workplace bullying isn't anger or tears, but careful preparation documentation and the courage to use proper legal channels to protect yourself and others. Your voice matters, your documentation is powerful, and your willingness to stand up for what's right can create positive change that extends far beyond your own situation.